Using a serger sewing machine to only clean finish fabric edges is comparable to using a microwave for warming water for tea. In short, you're not getting the value of your purchase. To solve this dilemma, I've invited serging expert Pam Massey to be my guest and to inspire us to use sergers to the fullest potential. Pam, I've known you a while, and I know you can just about make a serger sing.
Well, thank you, Nancy, for having me. But before we actually sing, we do need some rehearsals. During this series, we'll be detailing creative ways to use a serger. But I'd like to start with something as simple as a seam. Locking the stitches at the beginning and end of the seam will be my first technique to share with you. It's easy once you know how.
Ultimate Serger Techniques, that's what's next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effect threads, because creativity is never black and white. Koala Studios, fine sewing furniture custom built in America. Clover, makers of sewing, knitting, quilting, and embroidery products for over 25 years. Experience the Clover difference. Amazing designs and Class A needles.
During this two-part series, Pam and I are going to be detailing basic techniques and then some creative techniques, but this basic technique of locking the stitch at the beginning and end of the seam is something that not everyone knows. We're working with the basic 4-thread overlock stitch, the most common stitch on a serger, and uses 2 needles and 2 loopers, so you have 4 threads, Pam.
Right. We're working with 4 threads right now on the machine as the basic setup. Then let's travel down inside and look at where those loopers and needles are going to be. Inside, the machine will be threaded with the 4 threads. I'm just going to remove the presser foot and point out where the needles and the loopers are and how they react with each other in order to form the stitch. Now, as that stitch is formed, it's stitched over stitch fingers, and as you can see how those stitches are formed, you know, as you said, you can't reverse. And sometimes a seam sealant isn't always a product we're wanting to use. So let me just snap the presser foot back on and get it set up for stitching.
You can check your owner's manual how the tension should be set, but you're using 2 needles, using serger thread that's 2-ply instead of 3-ply. It is best because you have multiple threads in there, and Pam will show you how to start and stop at a seam.
Okay, now we do have our blade engaged, so we are going to be trimming off a little bit. And as you approach the beginning of the seam, you want to stitch only 2 stitches onto the piece of fabric. Raise your presser foot, bring the tail, you have a long tail generally on your sergers at the beginning. You lower the presser foot and stitch for about 1 inch over the tail. Then after you've stitched, bring the tail down between the blade, trim it away. And our sergers can stitch 1,500 stitches per minute, but we don't always need to sew quite that fast. And especially as you approach the end of your stitching, take only 1 stitch off the edge. Make sure your needle is in the highest position. Raise your presser foot. And now you saw how those stitches were formed on the stitch fingers. We need to just simply pull a little bit of slack in the needle threads, slide the slack out just enough to turn that piece of fabric over, slide it back under the presser foot. And what I like to do is back up at the needles. I'm just going to, or threads, I'm just going to pull a little bit of slack that we've put into the thread. We're going to remove it, and that will eliminate any of the loops that you have.
And you might want to disengage the blade. It has a blade, so it doesn't cut all those stitches.
Right, the previous line of stitching, we disengage the blade, stitch over about 1 inch, and then turn that stitching out of the way.
And there you can see how those stitches are locked into place. And another basic technique that we'd like to share with you is stitching around a curve, because sometimes when you go around a curve, it's difficult to get it smooth. This is the length of a traditional serger foot. You may want to consider working with a curved foot, which Pam is snapping on right now, and the shorter length makes it easier to maneuver around curves. And show that technique, Pam, for our viewers.
Okay, very good. I am going to engage the cutting blade once again so that as I stitch around the curve, the key to working and stitching around curves, two things. We want to always have fabric in front of the presser foot, and we also want to shorten our stitch length a little bit as we go around the curve. Always have that fabric in front of the presser foot. Turn the fabric, and again, that curved foot is going to make a big difference in holding your fabric in place. And then just simply serge off the edge.
So change the length, do a little trimming, use a shorter foot. And then our last basic technique is to sew in the round, like around bottom pair of pants, a cuff, wherever you have it in a circle.
Okay, just like we did at the beginning of our straight line stitching, we want to pull the stitches off of the stitch former, insert the fabric into the machine, and now as you stitch, we're just going to quickly stitch around that curve. We're stitching a curve but on a straight line. Stitch all the way around, and now as you approach the beginning of your stitch again, you can see how we're approaching the stitch. Just simply turn your blade to lock. I'm going to trim off that little tail. Stitch over it, and you'll see that you can align the marks that are on your presser foot with the previous line of stitching. Stitch over for about a ½ inch, then just simply turn your fabric out of the way.
And trim.
And trim. And then you have a nice finished edge.
So these are the basics. Now it's on to the creative approach. Piecing a quilt top with your serger might have never crossed your mind, yet for simple quilt designs, the serger is a fast and accurate way to make a quilt top. Seamed traditionally or with decorative threads, and this time you have the seams exposed. Either way, your serger can be your go-to quilting machine. You just saw a little framed art of serger samples with the Roman candle design, and the seam is with the 4-thread overlock stitch. I've adjusted my serger for a slightly wider stitch to a 5.5 millimeter so that I accomplish the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, which is traditional in serging. I have 2 pieces of fabric, long strips together, meeting right sides, and I'm guiding the fabric along the blade area and just serge. As Pam mentioned earlier, you can serge at 1,500 stitches per minute, so that this is a fast way of creating a serge seam. Not for difficult seams, but for basics. It's great. Now, another option is to do the same serging, but stitch with wrong sides of the other right side together and decorative thread in the loopers, those lower areas that can have a larger eye. And Pam will show you how to work with decorative heavier weight thread in just the loopers, not in the needles. And Pam, you have that just about ready to be threaded.
We're ready and set up to go. As you mentioned, we're going to be placing the wrong sides of our fabric together, so we have that pretty decorative stitch showing on the outside. We have the machine threaded for our decorative threads, and I simply just place the threads in the loopers, as you said. That's going to give us that decorative look and decorative stitch on the outside. Now, as I stitch, wrong sides together again, just simply stitch, and away you go. Okay, you end up with a really pretty decorative stitch on the outside of your fabric or seam.
Now this time we're not going to lock those stitches because the different blocks will be assembled together and that stitching will hold the blocks together. But isn't that a pretty seam, and it's exposed. For a simple design, it's great. And you may have an option on your serger to do a wavy effect so that it has even more texture and dimension. And if you use different colors of thread in your upper and lower looper, you can see that effect. And you have a few little setups you'll have to work with. Check your owner's manual, but Pam, why don't you review those?
Okay, we're just simply going to move the lever from overlock to wave stitch. We're going to set it so that our tension is set properly, and we're going to move our thread from the upper looper position over to the needle position. That just gives a little different tension on our fabric. It's also very pretty when we set our stitch to a little bit shorter stitch length. and our stitch width is still going to be at that 5.5 setting.
Now, if you're wondering, how are you going to remember all this, the owner's manual will give you all these different settings. We didn't make these up. It's easy to do. Or the book that accompanies today's program will give you all the settings that you need.
Perfect. And as we stitch, you can create a very interesting stitch using using the wave setting, and it will look almost like a rickrack stitch. I'm just going to stitch a short section here so you can see how that looks.
Yeah, that's why you can use a simple design. You're adding the detail with the serger. So,
experiment with decorative thread and have some fun.
Home decor, wearable art, or kids' clothes. Those are a few of the categories where piping accents add interest in texture. With a serger, piping is easier than ever to include in a seam or along the outer edge of your next project. Now granted, we're working with small samples today, but in a larger format you would see this adds a lot of interest, as I mentioned, and texture. If you were working with a traditional sewing machine, conventional sewing machine, you put on a specialty foot. The same is true with your serger. You're going to be working with a cording foot that has a grooved out section on the underside, allowing the cording piece to glide through there with ease. So it fits right in that groove, and when Pam is doing the serging, you'll see how smooth that stitch is. To create the fabric the right size, cut on a bias. Bias strips about 1.5 inches, and you can see the bias that we have. And I like to fold this so that we have the point to my right side, and we'll fold it in half. The cording will be placed on the wrong side of the fabric with an extension of the cording for about 2 to 3 inches. And the reason for this is that, as I have this started, when I place it underneath the presser foot, that I have a tail to hang on to, so to feed it. And Pam, you've already done that on your serger.
We've already started, and again, the cording is placed into the groove on the presser foot. Our stitch width is going to be set at 4.5, and the beautiful part about this is that your piping is made exactly the width that you need it. It's trimmed away, and when we restitch it, which we're going to do in just a couple of seconds, it's going to be the proper seam width. So I'm just going to finish serging, and as you can see how easy that stitches the piping.
And Pam has set her machine for a 3-thread overlock. You can take out one of the needles so you don't have as many threads per seam, and that works better for making the piping.
Okay, and once we come to the end, we're just going to serge right off the edge. Any excess piping we'll just leave on the edge. Okay, now we're ready to attach the piping onto our piece of fabric. The easiest way to do this is remove some of the cording from the beginning of your piping. So just pull a little bit of the cording out and then slide your stitch back up. Lay the piece of fabric onto the fabric edge, aligning the edge of the piping, the seam allowance, with the edge of your fabric. Then reinsert this under your presser foot. Lower the foot in place. Now turning a corner could be tricky, but
in your stitch width, do you ever change that?
Yes, we do. Thank you. We do want to increase our stitch width to the widest width. That will cover the previous line of stitching and also place our needle snug up to the piping
So
edge.
we'll give you all those instructions, but just you want a snug stitch.
You want a real snug stitch, so it's not going to be loose inside the fabric. Now when we approach the corner, we want to stitch slowly and just have your fabric come up right onto the bed of your serger. Then we're going to pull the piping out of the way and then lay your scissors down at a 45-degree angle, lay the piping back in place, and then cut right up to the line of stitching. Then I'm just going to hold my fabric in place and turn the piping out of the way and continue stitching. Okay, then reinsert it back into the machine. Turn your corner, reinsert back into the machine, right underneath the presser foot, again so the piping is inside the little groove, and stitch.
And Pam would do the same technique on every corner. Now, if you would like to enclose it in a seam, you just place your fabric on top of it and re-stitch that seam following the same sequence. And when you're done with that, all the piping is sandwiched between those two fabrics and it looks lovely. A blanket stitch is an ideal way to finish the edges of fleece. Why? The stitches will always be even and the process extra easy. Here's how to set up your serger for the blanket stitch. Just like on a traditional or conventional sewing machine, there are different stitches and you have to make changes. The same will apply when we're talking about this blanket stitch. We have decorative thread that makes a more pronounced edge and finish, and it has a really neat look. Now, Pam, it's a flat lock stitch that we're going to ask our viewers to use, and I always have to refer to my owner's manual for the setting of this.
Because it's a stitch we don't use regularly, we will refer to the owner's manual, and we're using a 3-thread decorative stitch this time. Now, when you look at the way that we have our serger threaded, you might say, ooh, something's wrong there, but you'll notice that we have 2 decorative threads that we're going to be working with, and both decorative threads are going to be fed through the upper looper thread guide. So we place both threads through the upper looper thread guide, follow it down to the front of our machine, and then at that point is where they separate. The needle thread will come across and down to the needle. We will use a size 90 needle because it's going to accommodate a little heavier decorative thread, and we don't want to use a thread really any larger than a 12 weight.
Now, thread is always confusing to me because the smaller the number, the thicker the weight of thread. So this is a pretty thick thread.
It is a pretty thick thread. Then the other thread, which is in our upper looper, we're going to place into the threading and thread it through our upper looper. We're also going to, by working with a knit fabric, we may want to adjust our differential feed. Now, the differential feed adjustment takes place on the side of your typically on the side of your machine. And we're going to raise our differential feed lever up 1 notch from the neutral setting.
Now, that differential feed refers to the feed dogs, you know, those little bite-like tools that be underneath the presser foot, and the tighter it is, the more fabric it will bite into place, and hence will not stretch that knit fabric.
And you may not need to use that on the entire length,
Sure.
only if you're stitching on the stretchier grain of your fabric.
So a little sample goes a long way.
Absolutely.
Test sample.
Test. That's something you always want to do, especially when you're working with a decorative thread as well. You do also want to increase your lower looper tension. Increasing that lower looper tension will also adjust how our threads are going to lay on our fabric. Now, we're simply going to place a piece of water-soluble stabilizer on the top of our fleece fabric. We're going to adjust our stitch length a little bit closer and set our stitch width to the widest setting. And then we simply stitch.
So it's a lot of setup.
A lot of setup. And then our stitch will look very pretty on the edge of our fabric. After you have the stitch finished, you may look at it and say, that doesn't look quite so nice. But the beauty and the magic comes in when we take our water-soluble stabilizer and just roll it over the edge. And once it's rolled over, just simply pull the stabilizer away, and you can dab it with a little bit of water, and then you end up with a very pretty decorative stitch.
So that's really a great ultimate technique, using a flat lock stitch, decorative thread in the needle and the upper looper, and then doing the stitching on the water-soluble stabilizer. Now, Pam, you've also done this on other fabrics other than fleece.
Yes, you can use it on like a blanket fabric or a boiled wool fabric, all different types of fabrics, even a knit, just like a t-shirt knit for a decorative neckline if you'd like to.
So this is a finish on 1 layer of fabric or perhaps 2 layers of fabric with an outer finish blanket as well as knit fleece wear, and it's an ultimate technique that I hope you'll try. It goes without saying that vacations are wonderful bonding times for families. Today's Nancy's Corner guests and their kids take their time off far from campgrounds or theme parks. Recently, they traveled halfway around the world to teach disadvantaged young girls to sew. To share their remarkable journey, please welcome Brett and Christy Moore from Montevella Sewing in Portland, Oregon, who join us via Skype. Brett and Christy, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
You have a remarkable story, how you went on a trip to Thailand, but then wanted to do more. So tell our viewers how you ended up teaching in Thailand, but started as a vacation.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. We have been a third generation business, and we've been in this a long time, 64 years. And we were given a trip by one of our manufacturers to Thailand. And during that time, we were in a place where we felt compelled to try to give back more, make our business more missional. And we were given this trip to Thailand, and we just tried to ask open doors of how we could be of use in Thailand. And we ended up stumbling upon a organization called Remember New, spelled NHU.
And you went back to Thailand with your kids.
Yes, we went there with our kids. We went on this manufacturer trip first, and then stayed there on with the kids and taught sewing in summer of 2012 at the Remember New home.
Now, Christy, your teaching conditions weren't exactly prime.
No, they weren't.
And you sat with the girls, and these girls are fairly disadvantaged. You've saved them from a life of something we want any of our children to have.
No, it's absolutely horrific. Remember New, what they do is they have the ability to be able to find different girls and boys that are going to be sold into the sex trafficking. And they're able to see which ones are going to be most at risk. And they can do this by various methods, depending on the culture and what it is that why it is that the culture would do this. But then they will rescue these kids out and actually put them in one of these homes, and they'll give them clothing and food as well as schooling. And so what we did is we brought machines and transformers or anything else that's needed to be able to actually give them a vocation, so that when they graduate from high school, they then have a way and a means of being able to make money instead of, again, being into the sex trafficking.
Yeah, it's humbling experience humbling to learn of this. And one of the items you made, or the girls make, is a bag with cording.
Yes, that was a fun project because it involved a lot of people. I mean, the cording had to be bought by the kilo, and so it's just a big mass of knots. And so the little girls had a chance to be able to untangle that, and then they cut the strips, and then they did the casing. The whole project was just a lot of fun for them.
And Brett, you take new machines out there, not used machines.
Absolutely. And I might do it differently when we went to Cambodia, because I got there and I realized we had the only new machines in the whole country there.
Very prestigious. And then you teach the boys how to repair them.
Yes, they had some old sewing machines around and they weren't working. And so we spent some time taking them apart, showing them how to do timing and tension and how to repair machines. And that was kind of fun.
And Christy, you said that your kids were the photographer and the journal keepers, respectively,
Yes.
I believe.
Yes. So yes, my son was in charge of videography and my daughter was in charge of photography. And of course, while they're actually capturing these various moments, their hearts in the process were being captured. It was really an incredible experience. One of those things that you just can't even parent through it. They have to experience for themselves.
You told me a very touching story when we were talking earlier about when you asked your kids what they thought of this experience. And could you share that with our viewers, please?
Yes. So it was on our trip to Thailand. We were at the airport coming back home after we had been there for several weeks. And I asked them both, what did you think of our trip? And they said, well, Mom and Dad, this is what's going on. You know, when we see Grandma and Grandpa, when we go back to the States and they look at us and they'll see our faces, they'll recognize us. But if all that they could see was our hearts, they would no longer know us.
Well, what a touching way to end this interview. You really are doing a wonderful service, a mission, as well as teaching your kids great value. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
If you would like to learn more about Remember New, go to our website, nancyzieman.com, click on Nancy's Corner, and you'll find information listed there. We would like to thank you for being part of this two-part series. It's the first of two-part series on the ultimate serger techniques. Pam will be back next time to share more interesting ways of using an overlock and cover stitch serger. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.
Nancy and Pam Massey have written an Ultimate Serger Techniques workbook, which includes laminated instructions for all the techniques featured in this two-part series. It's $19.99 plus shipping and handling. To order the book, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithNancy.com/2724. Order item number BK2724, Ultimate Serger Techniques workbook. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at nancyzieman.com to see additional episodes, Nancy's blog, and more. Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, has been brought to you by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Studios, Clover, Amazing Designs, and Class A Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Oliso. Sewing with Nancy is a co-production of Nancy Zieman Productions and Wisconsin Public Television.